A 40-foot prehistoric snake, mysterious ancient primates, and a bizarre discovery, dinosaur footprints on a cave ceiling. How on earth did they end up there? These are strange discoveries made in mines far below the surface. Deep in northern Colombia, there is a coal mine that looks more like a giant scar across the land. It stretches for miles, all dust and exposed rock, with huge machines tearing through layers that have been buried for tens of millions of years. Well, around the early 2000s, a team started noticing unusual fossils coming out of the walls. Pieces of vertebrae and ribs, and they were massive. The bones were so large, they were initially mistaken for crocodile remains. The team kept collecting more and more fragments, slowly piecing the thing together. It took a long time before someone finally recognized the structure of the vertebrae for what it really was: a giant snake. And there were more than one, all from the same species, pulled from different parts of the mine. The snake was later named Titanoboa. Based on the bones, scientists estimated it could reach around 40 feet long, weighing over a ton. These fossils were sitting in rock layers that were about 58 million years old, from a time just after the dinosaurs disappeared. In 1709, miners in Sweden broke into a part of the fallen mine that had been sealed off and flooded for years. About 150 meters down, once the water drained, they saw something lying in the tunnel. It was a body, not bones, a full body with skin, still in his clothes. The body was so well preserved that everyone thought the man had died recently. But nobody was missing, and nobody recognized him. The mystery didn't last long once word spread, though. An older woman came to see the body and immediately knew who it was: her fiancé, Mats Israelsson, known as Fat Mats. He disappeared back in 1677, over 40 years earlier. Imagine going to a cave and seeing your dead fiancé that you hadn't seen in 40. That must have been a trip. And it was almost like he just died the week before. The mine had preserved him so well. The water he was trapped in was full of copper compounds that stopped normal decay. And so when they brought him up to the surface, his body slowly dried out and hardened. Papers at the time described him turning hard as wood. Instead of burying him, they put him on display, though. For decades, people traveled just to see him. He stayed like that for about 30 years before he was finally buried. Then he was dug up again years later, moved, stored, and displayed all over again before finally being laid to rest for good in 1930. Sounds like a very exhausting afterlife. Out in southern Thailand, there's a coal mine in Krabi where the ground has basically been peeled open layer by layer. That exposed rock ended up holding something way older than anyone expected. In 2013, researchers came across a tiny jaw and a few teeth, just fragments. But those fragments turned out to belong to a completely unknown primate species, later named Crabia minuta. It lived around 35 million years ago and only weighed about half a pound. It's a very interesting find because it comes from a time when early primates were somehow moving from Asia to Africa, even though this massive sea separated the continents. No one fully agrees on how that happened. And finds like this are rare for a simple reason. Thick jungle usually hides everything. It's almost impossible to find fossils in places like that because the ground is completely covered. In Missouri, there's a small town sitting on top of something most people would never expect. Underneath it is an old lead mine that used to stretch deep underground, with huge rooms carved out of solid rock over decades of digging. It started back in the 1800s and ran for nearly a century before shutting down in the early 60s. When the mining stopped, pumps that kept water out were turned off, and slowly groundwater started seeping in. It steadily rose, filled the tunnels level by level until most of the mine disappeared water. And what that left behind is pretty breathtaking now. The lower levels turned into this massive underground lake stretching for miles, holding around 1 billion gallons of water. And nothing was cleared out before it filled, so mining carts, tools, entire sections of equipment, even elevator shafts are still down there, exactly where they were left. And the place is open for tourists. Next up, we have dinosaur tracks on the ceiling. In Mount Morgan, Australia in 1952, miners working inside an old cave system came across something incredibly odd. High above them, stuck in the rock ceiling, were clear dinosaur footprints. Not one or two, either, a whole trail of them, spaced out like an animal had been walking across wet ground. Only instead of sitting under their feet like normal footprints, they were overhead, roughly 10 to 15 feet above where people stood inside the mine. For a long time, people, understandably, couldn't really agree on what they were seeing. Whatever creature made the tracks seemed to have moved in an unusual way, because the prints didn't always look clean and simple, but that didn't solve the bigger question. How was this dinosaur crawling on the roof like Spider-Man? What a terrifying image. Well, there is an answer. It comes down to how the ground changed over millions of years. Back then it was a muddy lakeshore. Dinosaurs walked across it, leaving footprints behind, those prints filled with sediment and slowly hardened into rock. Over time, more layers built up above it, and then erosion and shifting started stripping away softer material underneath, especially once the cave system formed and mining exposed parts of it. What's left now is basically a flipped snapshot of that ancient surface. The original ground layer is now the roof, so you now see the footprints from below. In Tuscany, Italy, miners working in a coal mine back in the 50s started pulling out bones from the rock. First, it was just bits and pieces, then more kept showing up until they basically had parts of a whole skeleton coming out of the mine walls. What they found was Oreopithecus bamboli, an ape that lived around 9 million years ago. Right away, it threw scientists off. Some parts of it looked oddly human, especially the hips and legs, like it might have been able to stand or walk upright. But then other parts didn't match that at all, more like a regular ape that just lived in a weird environment. So it turned into this long-running debate. Some researchers think it was its own strange branch of evolution, possibly isolated on an ancient island. Others think it's just an ape that ended up with some unusual features because of where it lived, not anything close to human ancestry. Even the teeth didn't really help clear it up. Everything about it sits in this awkward middle ground. It just doesn't really neatly belong anywhere. In 1993, miners at a salt mine in Iran came across something pretty grim. A severed human head was sticking out of the salt, covered in crystals, with a beard, a mustache, even a gold earring still attached. It was not alone. It ended up being the first of several mummified bodies that would later be called the Salt Men of Iran. Were all miners who died inside the tunnels, most likely in collapses, and the salt ended up preserving them over thousands of years. The dry, salty environment basically stopped normal decay. Some of the bodies were found in unsettling positions too, their arms still raised, frozen at the exact moment they died. One of the creepiest is known as Salt Man number 4. He was a young man caught in a cave-in. His body turned out to be the most intact of all of them, with not just bones and skin preserved, but organs as well. They found tapeworm eggs inside him, so he must have eaten raw or undercooked meat just before he died. So far, at least 6 complete bodies have been found, possibly up to 8, with some dating back more than 10,000 years. During the Australian gold rush in the 1850s, thousands of miners flooded into a small settlement called Ballarat in the state of Victoria. It was one of the biggest gold hotspots in the country at the time, with entire camps popping up almost overnight. Inside one of the mining areas, near a place called the Bakery Hill, a group of 22 Cornish miners were digging about 180 feet underground when one of their picks hit something solid in the rock above them. First, it just felt like another stubborn section of rock, but as they chipped away at it, it became clear it wasn't a rock at all. It was gold. Not a thin vein either, but one massive chunk sitting embedded in the ceiling of the tunnel. When they finally freed it, the miners pulled out what would be called the Welcome Nugget. It was about 152 pounds, making it one of the largest gold nuggets ever discovered. When it broke free, there was chaos in the tunnel. Miners dropped everything they were doing to rush over and see it. Some were reportedly stunned by just how massive it was. After it was brought to the surface, it didn't stay intact for long though. Sold, displayed for a time, and eventually melted down in London to be turned into coins. So the images you see of it now are replicas. In 2024, archaeologists digging through an ancient gold mine in Egypt found 2 sets of iron ankle shackles that were buried inside a storage building at a site called Goza, a mine that was active between 250 and 200 BCE. They've been described as some of the oldest shackles ever found in the Mediterranean. Design matched what ancient records already hinted at: prisoners of war and criminals being forced into mining work in Egypt during that period. But at Goza, researchers originally thought most of the miners were there willingly. There were no signs before this that would lead you to believe anyone was there against their will. For example, there were no guard posts, no locked living quarters. I mean, that's what you'd expect if the place was a forced labor camp. But iron restraints are definitely a sign that at least some of the workers in the mine had been forced to be there. And that's been the video. I will catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next one.